What's going on, guys? Today we are going to be talking about the Canon R7 Mark II and what my wish list is for that new camera that should be coming out sometime in the next year or two. I'm excited for it because I would love to try it out, and I'm hoping it's going to bring some big upgrades in terms of what the R7 currently offers, which I have right here. Now, I've taken nearly 30,000 shots in the space of like 10 months or so, and I'm really happy with the camera. The firmware updates that have come out have made a big difference, but there is still quite a lot of things that are a little bit bothersome that I'm hoping are going to be solved with the R7 Mark II. So one of the biggest things for me is that the buffer and the rolling shutter are not very good on this R7. The rolling shutter is abysmal in electronic mode. You can get shots in between the rolling shutter ones that aren't, or that do include it, but not so much, so it's not that distracting. However, there is more shots that do have it than don't have it, and that is something that I would love to see resolved in the R7 Mark II. Obviously, the sensor readout speed is a big problem on the R7, especially with that buffer, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the readout speed is a massive issue because what it does, especially on the R7 as it is that it reads across the sensor slowly, and because it's reading across the sensor slowly and downloading that images, you end up with a lot of rolling shutter, which is frustrating for electronic shooters. Now, you can turn off electronic shutter mode, and I go with electronic first curtain, which means my first shot may have a little bit of rolling shutter, but then the rest of them after that don't, and they come out pretty decent. So I've had a lot of success with this camera. I've taken some beautiful images with it, and I'm very happy. However, the rolling shutter issue would, be resolved if they did something like a stacked or global sensor. I imagine it's going to be a stacked sensor like the R5 Mark II and the R1. They're both stacked sensors, and the readout speed does definitely need to go up just to solve some of them issues. Now, they may include the Digic X accelerator chip that they've added in some of the newer cameras, like the R5 Mark II, into the R7 Mark II. And if they do, that might solve some of the problems, but I'm really hoping that they up that readout speed like they did with the R5 Mark II. The readout speed is basically instant with that camera, and if they can do that with the R7 Mark II, then we're on to a winner straight away. The buffer, obviously, in an ideal scenario, the buffer would be you start taking photos, and then as your buffer fills up, it lets you know how full you're going to be, but then also as it's going down, or as you're shooting and getting that buffer lower and lower, it should slow down the amount of shots you could take rather than hit the buffer and then just stop you taking pictures completely. That's one thing that I'm very frustrated with at the moment, is if I hold down the trigger and I'm in pre-capture mode, I've already taken like half a second or whatever it is in pre-capture mode. I then hold it down. I've then filled the camera with like 30, 40, 50 pictures at 30 FPS, and now the camera will not take a picture for a minute or two while it writes to the cards. So I feel like quicker readout speed will solve some of that issue. The buffer is not a R7 problem, it's a Canon problem. If you hit the buffer, it stops you shooting completely. So having an indicator to say you're gonna hit the buffer like you do in pre-capture mode is very good. However, I also don't like the fact in pre-capture mode or any of the other modes, if you hit the buffer or you stop taking photos and it's then writing those to the card, it stops you taking pictures. In pre-capture mode, that's definitely a thing. So it's a bit of a downside to pre-capture, and it's one that I really wish they would resolve. Another thing with pre-capture that they could resolve, and will, hopefully, fingers crossed, is that when you are taking photos in pre-capture, at the moment on the R7, it literally writes a massive, like, 1 GB file to your SD card, and then you've got to go and open that in DPP, or Digital Photo Professional, to then go through frame by frame and save each frame that you want to keep as a separate file. So that means I've got to create a separate file called pre-capture in every folder that I create for every single trip I do. If I've used pre-capture at all, put the pre-capture files in there and then export them into my actual gallery with the rest of my photos. That is frustrating. It takes a long time in comparison to just whacking the cards in the computer and just transferring everything off. In the R5 Mark II and R1, they have solved this problem, and pre-capture no longer writes those big, massive files. So, in the end, it actually is a better thing, and you can just have all access to all the files right at the camera. You just export them as you normally would. Done. It's in the file you want. Upload them into Lightroom, edit your photos, done. Dusted. So, for me personally, that would be a massive thing. If they can get that right, that would be a big win in my book, because pre-capture is an amazing feature. I just wish they'd give us a little bit more control of how much time we have before and after, or before we start shooting, and then also just allowing us to have those files straight off the SD card rather than putting them in these separate files that we then have to convert or go into and export separately, frame by frame, which can be very, very tedious when you've got 100,000 shots of a kingfisher, for example. But as I mentioned, the Canon R7 is a great camera. If you're thinking about buying it, I will wait at this point, simply because we don't know what the R7 Mark II is going to get. I have heard that the autofocus is going to be improved in terms of it's getting the R1 and R5 Mark II tech in terms of autofocus, so it's going to be able to predict where the subject's going to be. It's going to be much more sticky, and it's not going to jump off the subject as much. However, I do say that with a grain of salt, because I wish that was the case. I don't know whether they would bring that technology to a camera of this level and caliber in terms of the price point of where it's at. Now, I think you could easily pay $2,500 or £2,500 or whatever for an R7 Mark II if it had dual CF Express, it did 4K fine and whatever else, and then also you would be able to do the pre-capture mode. You have the global or stack sensor. You also have the pre-capture mode fixed, and you have CF Express and a bunch of other stuff. Another thing would be a battery grip for this thing. I would love a battery grip, simply because it would mean I could put two or three batteries into this all at once. Probably two. I think it's two. So you would put a battery grip on this thing, you would have twice the recording time. At the moment, I could be halfway through the day and need to change the battery in this thing. So that means I've then got to faff around changing the battery, putting it back in, and I might miss a shot while that's all happening. Whereas if I have a battery grip, I don't need to worry about that. I can just pop the battery grip in and I'm good to go all day long. So to me, that would make sense, especially for a camera that is designated as a wildlife camera, really, because you go out, you're out all day. What are you going to want to do the least? Especially in the UK where it's wet, windy and horrible most of the time. You don't want to be opening the camera to put batteries in and whatever else, just in case you get moisture in there and you might kill it off. I mean, this is me thinking, like, really, really nitty-gritty about the small things, but that finer detail of, oh, if it's raining, I don't want to come out, open the battery thing and put the new battery in just in case something happens, because I might drop the battery in the mud, I might drop the camera or whatever else while I'm in the field. I might put it down on something that I shouldn't do. These things matter. And if you've got a battery grip, your battery lasts all day. You don't have to worry about it. So to me, that's a no-brainer for a wildlife-specific camera. These R7s, because of the way they're built with the APS-C sensor, the extra reach, these cameras are fantastic for wildlife shooters. And that's why I use it so much. It's why I went with the R7 in the first place. That extra reach is great. And pairing it with the 150 to 600, it gives me a reach that is fairly unparalleled with anything else, really. Don't get me wrong, some of the primes and some of the zooms are a lot better quality than this Sigma is, but I think as a combination, for the price that I paid, there's not much that beats it at this point. So I'm really, really happy with the camera. I just think, obviously, you give me a battery grip, you give me a CF Express or dual CF Express cards. Okay, we're talking professional grade stuff. Cool. That's what I want, because it would allow faster readout times to the cards. It would allow more of a buffer, especially if they up the buffer in the camera as well and reduce that readout speed right down like they did with the R5 Mark II. I mean, you're talking, that's going to be a really competitive camera just going off those specs. If we get a global or stack sensor, I imagine it'll be a stack sensor, not a global one for the R7, but if we get a stack sensor, the readout speed is faster, we get the digic accelerator, we get pre-capture that's now fixed and in the right place and works the way it should do and ought to. We get a battery grip compatibility with the R7 Mark II, 4K fine video, and better stabilization, better autofocus systems, a bit like the R1 and stuff has been talked about by many rumor sites of they may bring that new AI autofocus into the new R7 Mark II. If they do that and it sticks to the bird rather than jumping off onto everything else like the R1 does, I mean, that's going to be one hell of a camera. That's going to be one hell of a camera to beat. And in the APS-C market, there isn't much that can compete with something like that. I mean, look, you've got the Sony A6700, something like that, and there's a few other cameras out there that are sort of in that same or similar market. But you think about it. If an R7 came out with that autofocus, with the pre-capture mode fixed, with CF Express cards and, you know, the digic accelerator and faster readout times, a stacked or global sensor that allows that readout time to be utilized to eliminate the rolling shutter, I think at that point Canon's onto an absolute winner. And I think if that's the case and they do come out with that sort of thing and they update the firmware and keep it up to date and keep giving those updates that actually are meaningful and do something like they have for the R7 recently, man, that's going to be a very, very tough camera to beat. Like, just in general, that's going to be a very, very tough camera to beat in terms of quality, the megapixel size as well, to be able to have that croppability because it's bigger than 24 megapixels. You can crop slightly more. That's looking like a very promising camera to me. And I'd be very, very tempted to upgrade if that was the case. And I'd even keep the Sigma 150 to 600 potentially with that. And eventually, when Canon comes out with some of the lenses, I might upgrade eventually. But I think the other thing is, I heard they are coming out with a 150 to 600 Canon RF mount, which is an L lens. Now, it would be interesting to see how much that would cost compared to the 100 to 500, and it would also be interesting to see whether Sigma finally gets to be able to make full frame mounts or not. But, you know, I think when it comes to Canon's R7 Mark II, I think it's got the potential to be an absolutely amazing camera. And if they do the right things with it and they come out with the right updates that, you know, people like me and many others have asked for, you know, faster shutter speed, faster readout times, the CF Express card, at least one, a global or stack sensor. Again, I imagine it'll be stacked because that's what they've done with every other camera. Yeah, then this could be a game changer of a camera for Canon. And they have said multiple times that they are reimagining the APS-C lineup this year. So who knows what may come from 2025 and the Canon R7 Mark II. But honestly, the prospect is very exciting to me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and if you do agree with anything I've said or disagree with anything I've said, please leave a comment down below and get some interaction talking about what you would like to see in the Canon R7 Mark II. Without further ado, I'm going to end this video and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.